we know that marriage matters to God, but we also know that it's a lot of work. So what do you do when your love tank isn't being filled? How do you love your spouse in a way that fills their love tank? All of this and more with special guest and best-selling author, Dr. Gary Chapman, and me, your host, pastor and Bible teacher, Nat Crawford. Today, I am excited because I am with a special guest, Dr. Gary Chapman. Now, Dr. Chapman is an internationally known author, speaker, counselor, and pastor. He's an internationally recognized marriage counselor and director of marriage seminars. The 5 Love Languages is one of his most popular titles, and it has been translated into over 50 languages and sold over 11 million copies. Dr. Chapman, it is a pleasure to have you on the program today.
Well, thank you, Nat. It's good to be with you.
Well, you wrote the book, The 5 Love Languages, and my copy is so worn and beat up that I have to hold it together, with other props. But your book, honestly, not to embarrass you, but it honestly changed my marriage. Early on in marriage, my wife and I, we were emptying our love tanks, and they were not getting refilled. And it honestly drove us crazy. And to be perfectly honest, it nearly bankrupted our marriage. And then we got your book and we read it, we applied it, and our marriage began to change. So let me just begin by asking the question to you, what makes the 5 Love Languages stand out from all other relationship books?
I think 2 things, really. I think one is, most everyone agrees that our deepest emotional need on the human level is the need to feel loved by the significant people in our lives. Mm-hmm. And if you're married, the most significant would be your spouse. If you feel loved by your spouse, life is pretty beautiful. Mm-hmm. And you can face, whatever comes. If you don't feel loved, life is much more difficult. And so I think it's addressing that need. And the second reason I think it's been so popular is it gives a practical way to meet that need. Because at least in the early stages, we are loving each other, but we're not always connecting. And the concept of the love languages helps people learn how to connect emotionally with each other and meet that deep need for love.
Wow, that's a fantastic answer and very succinct. One of the things you say in your book is that we are influenced, but not controlled by our personalities. Now, I want to know what you mean by that, because I think a lot of people today, they live with this false belief or this posture that says, well, this is just the way I am, deal with it. You got to take me as I am. So what do you mean that people are maybe influenced, but they're not controlled by their personalities?
Well, let's just give you an example. Let's say the whole area of communication, okay? I like to think that there's 2 personality types. One I call the Dead Sea. The Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea goes nowhere, okay? And there are those of us that have that kind of personality. We can have experiences and feelings throughout the day. We have a large reservoir where we store all of that, and we're perfectly happy not to talk. Mm-hmm. The other personality type is what I call the babbling brook. Whatever comes in the eye gate or the ear gate comes out the mouth gate. Yep. And normally, these 2 people marry each other. So, the babbling brook is saying, I just wish you'd talk more. And the Dead Sea is saying, I just love a little silence once in a while. Mm-hmm. And we are influenced by our personality. But here's what the point I like to make. We're not controlled by our personality. Any couple, I don't care how different they are in this personality type, any one of those, they can have good communication. The Dead Sea can learn to talk more than they would normally talk. And the babbling brook can learn to slow the flow, ask more questions, become a better listener. So that's the point I'm trying to make, that in every area of life, certainly we are influenced by our personality, but we're not controlled. We can have good relationships because we can learn how to strengthen what might be a weaker part of our personality compared to the other person.
Wow. That is so true. I'm an extrovert. My wife's an extrovert, but when it comes to our relationship, I really do tend to be the Dead Sea, and she does tend to be a babbling brook. And it does work, surprisingly, but we have learned to flex into each other's wiring, and that's been beautiful. I've really learned to engage when she asks the questions, and I've gotten a lot better, though not perfect, because she'll call you to tell you the truth that, I still do struggle some days, but it really does work to not just say this is the way I am, rather to flex and to grow into the differences that we have with our spouses. Yeah. Well, okay, so in the 5 love languages, you talk about 5 different love languages. So what are the 5 love languages?
Well, briefly, one is words of affirmation. Mm-hmm. You look nice in that outfit. Really appreciate what you did. Just using words to affirm them. Another one is gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. The gift says they were thinking about me. Look what they got from me. There's acts of service, doing something for the other person that they would like for you to do. Cooking meals, washing dishes, washing the car, walking the dog, any of those things, acts of service. And then there's quality time, giving them your undivided attention. I do not mean sitting on the couch watching television. Someone else has your attention. But sitting there talking with each other, taking a walk together and talking, but they have your undivided attention. And then number 5 is physical touch. And in a marriage, that would be such things as holding hands and kissing and embracing, those affirming physical touch. Right. And of course, as you know, and the basic idea is that out of the 5, we each have a primary love language. And if one of those is more important emotionally than the other 4, and if you don't speak their primary, they won't feel loved, even though you're speaking some of the other languages.
Right. Well, and we're going to go into a little more detail into some of these languages in a little bit. But I'm curious, how did you discover these? I honestly don't know the answer to that question. So when you were writing this, how did you come to realize that these existed?
It grew out of my counseling. They would sit in my office, and one of them would say, I just feel like he doesn't love me or she doesn't love me. And the other would say, I don't understand that. I do this and this and this. Why would you not feel loved? Right. And they're sincere. And I knew they were sincere. And I heard similar stories over and over. I knew there had to be a pattern to what I was hearing. So eventually, I just took time to sit down and read several years of notes that I made when I was counseling and ask myself, when someone said, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into 5 categories. I later called them the 5 love languages and started using it in my counseling. That if you want her to feel love, you got to speak her love language. If you want him to feel love, you got to speak his love language. And I would help people discover their primary language, challenge them to go home and try it. Sometimes they would come back, Nat, in 3 weeks and say, this is just changing everything. The whole climate's different now. Yeah. And so I started using it in small groups of couples. And probably 5 years later, I thought, if I could put this concept in a book and write it in the language of the common person, maybe I could help a lot of couples that I would never have time to see in my office. So that's how it happened.
That's fascinating. Yeah, this honestly is one of the greatest cheat sheets forever for pastors and counselors. What you just described, I can't tell you how many times I experienced in my office. And I remember when my wife and I, Tiffany, we got this book and we read it. Like light bulbs went off, and it made sense because my primary love language is acts of service. And so I'm coming home, I'm cooking meals, I'm sweeping, I'm cleaning, doing laundry, folding laundry, and she's going, my love tank isn't being filled. And I'm going, you got to be kidding me. Like, I'm serving you like crazy to show you I love you. And she's like, I don't get it. And then she's like, Nat, I want to be with you. I want to be alone with you. I want quality time. And I'm like, I don't need that, honey. And in fact, but this is really embarrassing. So I'm ashamed to tell you this, but I'm sure you've heard this before in other counseling sessions where I finally heard her say, okay, I want quality time. And so I'd say, I'll give it to you, hon. So we're going to have friends over this weekend. We're going to be together. And she would say, no, stupid. I said quality time. Being with other people doesn't count. But what you have in this book really is so simple, but applicable for marriages. And it doesn't take any type of counseling degree or PhD to understand it and apply it. And when couples do, I am convinced after all the sessions I've done, it really, really works.
Yeah, it really does. It changes the emotional climate of a marriage.
It does. Well, you are listening to the Hard Questions, Real Answers podcast, a Back to the Bible podcast with me, pastor and Bible teacher Nat Crawford. And again, joining me today is best-selling author and speaker, Dr. Gary Chapman. So here we are talking about the 5 love languages, and I want to now get into a little more specifics about the languages. Honestly, the one language that tripped me up, not because we had it in our marriage, but I thought, that's really odd, is gifts. You talk about gifts, and the first thing that came to mind was, well, can you buy love? And if not, can you at least rent it? So talk to me about the love language of gifts. What is it, and how do we do it appropriately?
Well, it's universal to give gifts. My background before I studied counseling was cultural anthropology. I did an undergrad and a master's in that. We've never discovered a culture where gift giving is not an expression of love. And here's the deal. The gift doesn't have to be expensive. We've always said it's the thought that counts. So if you don't have much money, you don't have to have any money to give gifts. You can be taking a walk and see a bird feather and take it home and say to your wife, honey, I was walking and I found this feather and I thought about you. And I wanted you to have it because you are the wind beneath my wings, girl. Woo! Didn't cost you a thing.
Right.
Little kids go out and pick daffodils and dandelions, for their mothers. Well, guys, try it. See what's in your backyard,
Right. That is so true. Wow. Yeah, so I've noticed that with the love languages, I guess a question for you would be, can love languages change? Because what my wife said recently, and I'm like, I'm going to be on the phone with this guy. I'm just going to ask him, do love languages change? Because her primary was quality time, and then second was physical touch. But here we are 17 years in marriage, and she says those are still important to me, but gifts really do matter. So, I mean, do they ebb and flow, or how does that work?
Well, here's what I think happens. If you get enough of your number one and your number two, and you feel secure in those, one of the others may kind of rise in importance to you. Okay. I do think, however, that basically the primary love language tends to stay with us for a lifetime. But I think there are certain situations and certain seasons in life in which another love language may jump to the top. For example, here's a mother with 2 preschool children. Acts of service may not be her love language, but during those years, it's probably going to jump to the top because she's overwhelmed with all that has to be done. So I think that does happen. And as I said, I think if you get enough of number one, for example, you may begin to think, I don't know, I think number 2 has become number 1. But if they take away number 1, you'll quickly say, oh, no, that's still my primary.
Yeah, right. And that's exactly true. But if I'm going to summarize this back to my wife, you're saying that I'm actually doing a really good job in loving her in her primary and backup. Now I'm going to take that to the bank, baby. Dr. Chapman, he's got my back. Thank you. Man, this is the best session I've ever had. But I think you nailed it there, because part of that is also with seasons of life, because we've got 3 young boys, and the reality is right now she's a stay-at-home mom and she loves it. But when I come home and I do actually cook the meal, and which I still do, and I am jumping in on the projects, she loves it, and her love tank continues to be filled with those. So her primary and secondary are still there. But again, those seasons of life can create maybe a little bit of an increase in the need. Fantastic. Well, okay, let's talk about physical touch, because I know there's a lot of guys who are listening to this and they're going, cha-ching, it is sex time. I'm getting it on with my wife, and she's going to love that physical touch. But there's a difference between sex drive and physical touch. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have a lot of guys who will just hear the concept and hear the languages and say exactly what you just said. Oh, that's my love language, And they're thinking about sex. And I say, well, let me ask you a question. Do non-sexual touches make you feel loved? And first of all, they look at me like a deer in the headlights. Are there non-sexual touches? And I say, okay, let's say that you get out of the car together, you're walking into a shopping mall, and as you walk in the store, she reaches over and holds your hand. Does that make you feel loved? And if he says, no, that kind of irritates me. I said, okay, let's say she's pouring you a cup of coffee and she puts her hand on your shoulder. Does that make you feel loved? And if he says, not really. I said, well, physical touch is not your love language. Okay, right. You like the sexual part of marriage, but that's not your love language.
Right.
So, no, these are not gender specific. A man can have any one of the five. A woman can have any one of the five. But physical touch is not to be equated with the sexual part of marriage, though that is obviously one way to lovingly touch each other.
Yeah, and I've seen that countless times in counseling sessions where the man does get really excited and begins to advance. But what I've noticed, especially in my own marriage, again, physical touch is up there for her. Just a hug. And just letting her know that I'm there, or men, listen up to this. If she gives you the hint of, isn't that cute with that old couple over there still holding hands and walking down the street? That's a cue, my friend, to grab that hand and not make some dismissive, well, maybe he's keeping her upright. Just simply listen to the cues and go for it. But it's amazing how quickly that will fill the love tank. So here's something that I've wondered with marriage and with relationships. Once we recognize these, we're going to want to express those. We're going to say, okay, look, hon, I do have this need to fill my love tank. How do we do that so it doesn't sound like a demand or even manipulation?
Yeah. And that's important because we don't want to be demanding anything of each other. We want to be requesting, but we don't want to be demanding. One of the things I encourage couples to do after they've read the book and discovered the love languages and really want to utilize this is maybe every week or two or every other week, just say to your spouse, honey, on a scale of 0 to 10, how full is your love tank? And if they say anything less than 10, you just say, what could I do to help fill it?
Beautiful.
And they throw it out, and now you know. That day, that would be the most important thing you could do. It's just a little game you play in order to keep this on the front burner for the other person. And you're actually asking them to tell you what would make them feel loved. So you're not telling them, you're asking for it. So if both of you get this and you play this, it's a simple way of opening the door. I want to know what would make you feel loved today.
Fantastic. I've used a similar model of that with my wife. It's just a general, like how, on a scale of 1 to 10, how am I doing as your husband? And I've done that even with my kids. But again, to make it so specific, again, then you can begin to apply it, and that's beautiful. Okay, what do you do in a scenario where you have a spouse who's maybe completely, checked out, and so the spouse is now aware of what they need, and so the one spouse is giving and giving and giving, but they're not returning. There's just a barrier. How would you coach that person who's listening today on the radio or watching online?
Yeah. Well, sometimes people will say, I read your book and we discovered each other's language. And I tried it. I tried speaking their love language and they didn't reciprocate. Oh, it's not working. I said, so now let me get this straight. You're trying to manipulate them, right? You're trying to do this so they will do that. Yeah, no, that's not love. No. Love says, I'm here to enrich the life of my spouse.
Right.
And this is one way I can do that. Now, I do say this. We all know you can't change your spouse. You can't make them change, okay? But we can influence them.
Right.
Speaking their love language over an extended period of time. I'm not talking 3 weeks. I'm talking 6 months, okay? Over an extended period of time, I have seen very few spouses who did not begin to reciprocate before the 6 months is over. Wow. See, love stimulates love. Remember, the Bible says we love God because he first loved us.
Yes.
His love stimulated our love.
Right.
The same principle is true in relationships. So I say if you have an unresponsive spouse, you just say to God, Lord, I want to be your instrument of expressing love to my spouse in the right language. Give me the power and the motivation to do this. And you do it over an extended period of time. And what will happen somewhere along the line, my guess is they will begin to say to you, you've been awfully nice to me lately. What's going on? And you just say, well, I'm trying to learn how to be a better husband or a better wife. Well, it's working. Yeah. Then a little later, they're going to say, anything I could do for you? Right. Well, if you like. Yeah, it's the power of influence.
Yes.
And we often overlook the power of influence.
Right. Well, and I appreciate what you said there, because the reality is biblical love, that agape love, is a selfless love. We do it without the expectation of getting something back. That's incredibly hard in marriage, and especially if you've been running in a love deficit. You want to do it so you get it filled as quickly as possible. But that's honestly not the point. And if you're going to wait for your spouse to make the first move, I mean, the reality is you could be waiting forever. At some point, my wife and I, we both had to be willing to quit the demands and begin to give it away freely and allow the consequences to come and let God to be sovereign. And I think you're exactly right. Give it time. And generally speaking, majority of the time, it will begin to happen. But again, there is no silver bullet in these things, especially when it's taken years to create the issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the good news. We don't have to do this on our own. The love of God is poured in our hearts by the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
We open up our hearts and say, okay, God, I'm here. I'm married to them. I'm your agent.
All right.
Pour it into me.
Yes.
So I can pour it into them. Yep. And you're loving them in the power of God. And God loves them. We know God loves them, and we're his agent. So that puts it in a whole different perspective.
Bingo. Bingo. Wow. Well, I can't believe it. Our time is already up. But Dr. Chapman, if people want to learn more about you and about, your tools and your resources, where should they go?
They can go to 5lovelanguages.com. The number 5lovelanguages.com. You can take a free quiz there and learn your love language, as well as see all my other books and things that I think you'll find helpful.
Fantastic. Well, we encourage you here back to the Bible to check out those resources. We know they work because we've used them. The assessment tool is fantastic. We've used that for our family, and we've given out to thousands of other people. So we encourage you to do so. Dr. Chapman, thank you for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you, Nat. Good to be with you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Hard Questions, Real Answers podcast. To learn more about our podcast, be sure you check out backtothebible.org. Also, if you enjoy our program, be sure to give us a rating and share us if you like us on your favorite podcasting app. Remember, ask the hard questions and only accept real answers.